All right, welcome everybody. Thank you for making the journey over here to 3AB in the suburbs. This is the deep dive for SIG Cloud Provider, and I am Jago Macleod. I'm an engineering manager at Google, and I work on the API machinery and apps side of the world, and also spend a lot of time doing build and release for GKE and sort of rolling out across the fleet. So I have a lot of experience in that space. And I've spent a lot of time on the conformance program, which has its own deep dive right now at this exact time. So I'm here with you wonderful people instead of there. That's want to make sure that we have sense of SIG here. And this is...
Oh yeah, and I'm Chris Hoge. I work for the OpenStack Foundation. My senior strategic program manager, which covers a lot of things, but that includes community collaborations between OpenStack and Kubernetes. And similarly to Jago, I actually set up and run the equivalent of the conformance program at the OpenStack Foundation. Both of us are co-leads along with Andrew Sai Kim, who's in the audience right now, of SIG Cloud Provider. And so we're here to start the deep dive session.
And so Chris and I were chatting, and we decided that this late in the conference, folks are kind of tired of watching slides fly by and drowning them out mentally. So we're going to mix it up a bit and have a conversation about some gnarly topics is kind of the topic of our talk. And so we're going to quickly spin through the topics that we seeded for discussion. We're going to do a quick show of hands, so raise your hand if you prefer some topic over another. So we'll stack rank them at the beginning, and then we'll spend about 10, 15 minutes on some of these topics. And if it stalls out or seems like we're not making progress or we don't have the right people in the room, we can just move on from there. So some rules on engagement: please be respectful, don't cut people off. There is literally a talking stick, so we need to use it. Raise your hand, we'll get the mic to you. And if you want to follow on the last point, we'll try and give that preference over starting a new idea. And our goal here is to try and get input and participation from everyone. So if you have a perspective that's different than the groupthink, especially want to hear from you. And so those are our rules. Any questions on our rules? Anything we missed?
Should we have a different symbol for like raising or follow on versus a new topic?
Different. Two hands is follow on. It's the urgency. The question was, should we have a different signal for, I have a follow-on idea to that one, or new topic. In fact, let's flip that. Two hands is, I want to change this all together, because that'll happen less frequently.
And I'll actually just hang out down here so I can pass the microphone around for everybody, and then you can kind of operate.
All right,
slides.
I'll try and get the people and use my broadened field of view to get other people's perspectives. Okay, so we're going to spin through all of them, and then we're going to come back and vote, okay? So first one is build and release. And the idea here is what input should SIG Cloud Provider give to other SIGs like Cluster Lifecycle and SIG Release and SIG Testing around this very tricky problem. That as Kubernetes is broken down into more and smaller components and many, many, many repositories, what you get out of the Kubernetes build and release process is, or very soon will be, not sufficient to run Kubernetes in a production environment. And this is tricky. This is not moving from the problems of waiting for each other to no problems. This is the problem of moving from that to a new and different world that also has lots of problems. So that's one. The next is governance. We've talked a lot about collapsing the cloud-specific SIGs as sub-projects under SIG Cloud Provider. And there has been some resistance for pre-existing cloud-specific SIGs. And we just want to talk about what would be required to make that move universally acceptable. What are the needs? How do we go to CNCF? Do we have a proposal to meet the needs that is not specifically a SIG? And this is an outcome of a request from the steering committee to not have SIG explosion. And as a data point, there are about 70 certified Kubernetes providers. So having 70 SIGs on the SIG list page is not a goal of the steering committee. The next one is cloud provider extraction. We have spent, at this point, multiple years working on support for cloud providers that were not in the original Kubernetes repository. Some of us are using that approach and that code and that mechanism to run production environments. There is still the problem of the installed base and the migration, and the goal here is, can we all commit to a common timeline to make the final push? So, Chris, you want to take these last couple?
Yes. So this last one is a required update for the getting started pages on the Kubernetes.io docs. SIG docs right now, SIG docs is maintaining the Kubernetes.io/docs, and they want to make sure that it's the best experience for users that it can be. The getting started page has been identified as an existing problem, and it's been a problem that they've wanted to address for at least a year by this point. And they've asked us for help in identifying ways that we can provide documentation that is consistent and up to date, and also, in the same scope, fair to everybody who wants to express how to get started on their cloud. The management of these documents and SIG docs, they don't have the expertise. They're not domain experts for deploying Kubernetes in different production environments. And so they've come to us, as well as SIG Cluster Lifecycle, to help them identify how we can reorganize that documentation structure and and have a workflow for maintaining it so that it's always a positive interaction for the users and for the larger community.
And was there one more? No, that was it. Okay, so we're going to go back to the beginning. We're going to do show of hands. We're going to do rough count, and we're going to stack rank. Okay, so votes for the build and release topic. Not much. 1. Oh, and 2, 3. Okay, governance. Several. Okay. Cloud provider extraction.
Can we vote on multiple?
Sure, you can vote on multiple. Okay, and the docs update. Okay, so it looks like our order will be the cloud provider extraction, then which one was it, governance or docs?
Governance, I think, was higher than docs.
Okay, so we're gonna go 3, 2, 4, 1.
We can reorder the slides too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in true unconference style, if none of these topics appeal to you and you found yourself here and are just being polite and don't want to walk out, you feel free to get over it and go find another talk to listen to. That's totally fine too. We won't be offended very much. Okay, so.
All right, reordered.
Okay, so you have the mic cloud provider extraction. How about we start by someone throw out a date by which we should be, our deadline date, and then we start working back from that and talk about what are the concerns.
I want to say KubeCon North America 2020 or 2019.
So by this time next year,
Yeah.
we are done. And what does done mean in that situation? We need.
We'll let Walter have some feedback. We need to turn the mic on down there at the bottom too. There's this. Yeah, I should have done it before.
Is anyone available to take notes that we can share later? Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah, actually, maybe we can take the notes in the weekly meeting document. Yeah.
So as a marker, I would like to throw out deleting the 7 cloud provider implementations from Kate's as what I think it means.
It can't possibly run if it doesn't exist, so no one can cheat. All right. So that's the gauntlet being thrown down.
Here, then here.
So with that,
Remember to state your name
Sure.
to start off with, please.
Richard Tice, IBM. So with that removal, will that include a plan for like cloud providers to make a transition path for their users at that date as well, right? Because if it's removed, then now we need a transition by that date, I would think as well.
Yeah, in fact, I think that probably comes first, and we've had a lot of discussion on how that happens and what the steps are, and that it has to exist in multiple places, and then, you know, you need both legs, and then you take away the old leg, and but yes, that is the super hard part.
I'm Mike Root from AWS. I was going to actually say the same thing. We need a clear transition plan for all of our customers and good documentation as well.
Over here.
Hi, I'm Martin Vode from SAP. So my question is, does this removal include the cloud provider binary, or are we going to transition to binaries directly provided by the cloud provider?
Yeah. So the answer to that question is that it's yes, there are going to be binaries that are provided by the cloud provider, and they are interfaces to the cloud controller manager. And so when you launch Kubernetes, you pass a flag saying, provider external, and then you give it a path to the binary wherever that runs. And
So the cloud provider, cloud controller will be gone.
Walter, and then okay, yeah.
So I think we're delving a little bit into build and release, but let me give my interpretation, which is that the framework CCM code will be there, but that presumably the actual binary will be built in some other repo specific to your cloud provider.
It's Justin SB. I work at Google. I think if we want to aim for KubeCon next year, I think we have some factors which are going to make that challenging. I think we have to, I don't know what the exact rules are, but we probably have to do an alpha of external CCM and bring that to GA and then begin the deprecation period. So I think we've already missed next year. I don't know.
What are the periods of? I mean, what are the?
It's either 2 releases or 3 releases.
Okay.
But I mean, so 3 releases. Well, if we deprecated it now, when could we?
So the question that's not being spoken into the mic is
it's 3 releases for GA is the time period it takes to deprecate.
3 releases for GA. So I think we have a feature issue out that is kind of a catch-all for all the outer tree stuff, and I think it might start to make more sense if we broke like a features issue per provider, and we can push those initiatives like forward depending on each. I think our struggle right now is getting early adopters. So we have a lot of people who want to manage their own clusters and they're willing to try like the CCM and whatnot. But I think like to actually achieve this by 2019 next year, I think we need to have a lot of the larger like managed offerings actually use it to kind of push forward adoption. So like maybe GKE or EKS, if they started using it, then people feel better about like pushing those efforts forward. Obviously, it's much harder than.
So also, I'm not saying you're wrong, Justin, but I'm curious in that I know a lot of our deprecation policy is specific to what is being deprecated. And so I am curious to know exactly which one of the deprecation policies would apply. That's my thought.
I think it's also useful to note, and I don't know if every cloud provider has been deprecated, but earlier this year we added a code path that sits in front of all of the cloud providers that allows for announcement of deprecation. And we've even gone so far as to deprecate providers that don't have active maintenance on it, and it kind of shook some people to wake up and say like, oh, like something is going to happen. So for a lot of the providers, I don't know if it's for all of them, the deprecation period has already started.
So on that note, I think a more realistic goal would be KubeCon North America next 2019 is when we want to push for all the providers to use the CCM in their managed offerings, but the actual removal of the code itself can be maybe pushed to like 2020. Just because, yeah, like once you remove that code, like you're essentially abandoning a lot of people who might be stuck on like older releases and relying on like those cherry picks and whatnot.
So I'll start with +1, but I will also point out that the one weird part about a managed offering is that what we're talking about is the control plane, and most of the users have little to no visibility of the visibility on the control plane of a managed offering.
Yeah, exactly. They don't know, so let's do it.
I guess on that though, one of the concerns though is because it's a managed offering and we manage that master side for them, right? I need to have the ability to update them in a seamless fashion that I don't take anything down. So I think that's fine, but if we can get that in there, it's doable. If we can't, then I can't tell my users that, okay, you're gonna be down for an hour while I go and mess around with stuff, right? So I guess that's our biggest concern on our end anyway.
Well, and one quick note to that, I mean, to date, I believe especially in HA, which is where it gets tricky, going from KCM to CCM has been left as an exercise to the provider. So I'm happy to sit down and chat with anyone about what the difficulties are, but I guarantee you there's some very nasty ones in there, and I'm happy to chat about them.
Yeah, I was about to say if that can be a goal that we can add for the meetings is not just how do we remove the code, but how do we start testing best practices for doing live cluster migrations, because for a lot of people it's easy, you just start up a new cluster, like all new clusters start up, but existing clusters will be problematic, and if we can come up with I mean, part of what we're trying to accomplish with this SIG is to say that we're all in this together, even though we have separate offerings, and we want to help each other, in advance in a way that's better for the community.
Can I jump in too?
Yes.
I have a mic. So it's important to go back and reiterate the benefits of this. I guess for Google is one of the original cloud providers, and it would be easy to think of this as just a tax to pay to be part of the community. But if you're communicating with other folks in your own companies and need more buy-in, there are huge benefits to doing this. One of them is we obviate the need to wait for open source Kubernetes for a GCP only fix. So currently the way it works is if we find a bug in the cloud provider or in the GCP specific code, we submit a patch to upstream Kubernetes, and we wait or hope or bribe whoever is the patch manager that will go in the next patch, and then wait for that to happen for sometimes several weeks in order to get that out to our customers. If we can build and release that in its own cadence, then we don't have to wait. Moreover, there are other cloud providers that are not running in our cloud, or that code we don't want running in our cloud. Our security team, our privacy team, these folks are not super happy that there are hundreds of thousands of lines of code that get compiled in and initiated in our cloud provider. So if you need more motivation within your company, these are some of the reasons. There's also a resulting size difference on the control plane. It's like, I don't know, half the size, the resulting binaries are reduced by quite a bit. So double lines for deletion of code in 2019, and this would be a big double points. So we are motivated to continue this work, and Walter's done a lot of work trying to figure out what are those steps to get our customer base from what exists today to the new world where those things are decoupled. So,
And how many people here are actually working on the extraction process right now? Is that so? That's good. Like we have four people. If you want to get involved with upstream Kubernetes development and you want to get involved in a way that is going to have a major impact, this is a good project to get involved with. And Walter and Andrew are people to talk to about things that you can do. A lot of it is finding internal APIs that everybody is depending upon and moving them to staging, and kind of like unwinding like the tendrils, all of the places that providers reach in and touch stuff, and how do you cut those and make the interfaces clean?
anyone we haven't heard from have something to say on this topic? Just want to make sure. All right, propose we move on to the next topic. Outcome goal is 2019, have all current entry providers using the external one in production, and have a plan for when we get to rip that code out of the Kubernetes code base. I was just trying to talk about, the question was, do we have a carrot? And I was trying to enumerate some of the carrots that I have seen that it causes us to invest in it.
I mean, I was thinking about like a particular feature we would hold back and say you have to use.
So there is one built in, which, for the entry cloud providers to be part of the getting started page, they need to participate in the consistent documentation mechanism. And I would suggest maybe a ticking time bomb that if you're not actually meeting the requirements of that page, then you don't get to be there anymore. So maybe that's a carrot. It's a discoverability carrot, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
And someone else had a suggestion over here.
So would another carrot be the fact that if you were out of tree, that the build process would be in place to help you build your CCM? Or no? Is that a non-goal?
No, I like that goal, but it's number 4 on our list, so we'll come back to that.
And just to reiterate a point that Jago made, sorry, brain, long conference. I've been working with SIG release to be able to have a new Kate's build target, which actually does produce the shaved down binaries. So you get that hundreds of thousands of lines removed, apparently, and the actual decrease in binary size and what inits are being run. And that's only going to be available to someone who is out of tree. So if you want to see, a much smaller kubelet, a much smaller kube API server, and a much smaller kube controller manager, you get that by being out of tree.
Yeah.
That's a good carrot.
Yeah. And it might be both carrot and stick too, that at some point the SIG architecture wants this stuff out, and it's going to be out eventually. Like the changes are going to be made and code is going to be removed and deleted. And as a provider, you can run whatever version of Kubernetes you want to run, but if you don't have a way to run out of tree, newer versions of Kubernetes may not be available to you. And so that can be a carrot or a stick depending upon how you look at it.
Okay, so maybe put on the topic for our SIG meeting on January 9th to circle up and figure out who needs to work on what to make this true. Okay, move on. Any objections? Anyone last comment on that last topic? Okay, moving along. We're going to go to the governance. And so the question here is, we had discussions in general alignment and consensus that SIG should essentially become sub-projects. Cloud-specific SIGs should become sub-projects under SIG Cloud Provider. It's stalled out a bit in transition. And it seems one of the needs that existing cloud-specific SIGs have are to use those as user groups and a mechanism to communicate with their users. Another thought on the benefit of being a SIG is that you get intro and deep dive sessions here at KubeCon. Can we enumerate those benefits and submit a proposal to CNCF or the steering committee and figure out if we can meet those needs without having them be SIGs?
Yeah, so from the providers that so to provide some context, when we first proposed the SIG, we had wanted to do this like from the start, but because of those reasons and we didn't have like a solid answer to like to provide those things like Slack channels or meetings and SIG intro deep dives at conferences, we essentially said, okay, let's give it like a 6-month period for us to kind of figure things out. And so it's been about 6 months and we're still kind of not sure what to do here. But from the concerns or from the providers that have been very vocal about what we're missing, essentially what we need is something like a sub-SIG, which is everything that a SIG does, but on like a sigs.yaml file, it's a sub-project. So I've been told that if we at least provide like the Slack channel and some sort of session at conferences, then they would be like very open to that. And so I think, yeah, what you said, like if we can just submit a proposal to steering and they okay that, then I think we'll be at a pretty good place. I think we need to think about what we want to call this though. Like, do we still call it a sub-project, or do we want to call it sub-SIGs, or do we want to call it like user groups? Like, I think that'd be good.
It has a lot of unique characteristics because there's these sub-SIGs, they own code, like they own their own code, and owning code is one of the requirements for being a SIG. They actually have their benefits for presenting and talking at conferences, and using SIG Cloud Provider as the general advocacy organization to the steering committee for all of the cloud providers is, I think, one of the most important aspects of our charter. I don't know if it actually says that in our charter, but that's how I've always envisioned this SIG working, and because I know that everybody likes coming to these events and being able to have time to to meet with the people, with their contributors and their users, and we want to keep that going forward.
Yeah. And if anyone here is actually an end user, like as someone, like let's say you're running on AWS, like do the SIG meetings and the channels, like is there anything that if we were to like get rid of it, like how impactful is that for you as an end user?
Yeah, so for us as an end user, so if for example we find a bug in some of the providers, or the bug is shared, then I have to go to the individual SIG meetings, then to the cloud provider meeting, which in some cases some of you might attend, some of you not, and it feels very and the meetings are in different place, in different time, and so it's very hard, especially for more or less an end user.
My name is Peter. I'm an end user for SIG AWS. I find having a channel that is pretty much as specific as it can be for the issues that I'm having to be super helpful. If I had to be in some SIG cloud provider and ask my AWS question, I might get a relevant answer, but maybe not, and there's going to be a lot more noise of stuff that's not at all relevant to me. So having the specific channels of communication definitely helps.
Yeah, and one thing too that I think is relevant to this also is, like the SIG Cloud Provider, we own the cloud controller code and all the implementations of that, as part of the smaller SIGs. But there are also things like SIG Cluster Lifecycle that span multiple providers, and so there's these individual organizations, kind of have a broader reach for support and development, beyond some of the things that we're talking about here. And so I think it's valuable to make sure that all those channels exist and they exist within the community.
So it sounds like primarily support use cases is the primary use of those communication channels that's what we see in GCP, but I want to make sure that we're not over.
Well, it's for OpenStack. It's development too. Like we see support and development happen in both channels. Like that's.
Okay, so it sounds like we've come up with a proposal for sub-SIGs and propose some alternative names and present that to the steering committee and continue the conversation there.
Do we have a volunteer who would like to write that initial proposal, that draft proposal?
Sub-SIGs or sub-projects?
I think sub-SIG or user group or it's.
I think it's project by the convention.
So I think our original proposal was they become sub-projects of SIG Cloud Provider. The downside of that is that sub-projects don't have any mechanisms for like Slack channels, getting Slack channels, and what is the naming convention, and meeting times, and Zoom accounts, and some of the infrastructure that comes with being a SIG. And so.
We are a project, for example, the Postgres API is a project, but we get our own Slack channel and.
So the response is that the cluster API is a sub-project and gets all of that. So maybe there's no gap.
I think the question in my mind is whether a sub-project can itself have sub-projects. And I don't know, like, can a cog own code? Like, if we had, for example, I think AWS has a service catalog thing, which is a specific thing that is like Kubernetes objects around AWS concepts.
So fundamentally, I think it's just another layer of hierarchy, and whether that's a sub-SIG or a sub-project or something, right? That's where we are.
I mean, I think as long as it can own code, I don't mind what we call it. But that we have to be clear that it should still be allowed to own code, because otherwise we have these weird roll-ups that are very cloud specific in SIG Cloud Provider, which I think we want to avoid. ?
Sure. So I think the code ownership is one aspect. The slots for talks at events like this is another topic, and then the infrastructure and tooling is a third. But we've kind of swirled around this for a while, so we should try and at least come to closure. And I know Aaron Krickenberger would be happy to be a sponsor from within the steering committee. He's keen to reduce the number of SIGs overall.
So I wanted to do a time check right now. We have the room until 11:25, and we're a couple minutes away from that. So kind of going back to the point of, is there somebody who's interested in kind of maybe writing up a proposal that we can review and take forward?
I think maybe going into the holidays, finding volunteers will be difficult, but let's put it on the agenda to find a volunteer in our next meeting.
Okay.
So we're just about out of time. Anyone have a closing thought on this topic? And the others we will put on the agenda for our SIG meetings in the coming weeks to months. Thanks everybody for taking the time and participating and using the talking stick. Great job being respectful, and enjoy the last afternoon here. Thank you very much.
Thanks everybody.